Hey folks, this week Aaron Newcomb joins me and we talk with Ben Meadors and Garth Vander about Meshtastic. It's been a while since we've had them on the show and a lot has changed. We get updates on what's working, some things that haven't worked, where it's going from here, and a whole lot more. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is Floss Weekly episode 836, recorded Tuesday, June the 10th. Beeps and Boops with Meshtastic. It's time for Floss Weekly. That's a show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today we have something, that is very near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk with Garth and Ben about Meshtastic. We've got even a, what would we call it? A disclaimer I have to give before we actually get started. But first off, we're going to bring on our co-host who knows a little bit about this. Aaron, how you doing? Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I know a little bit about it, not much. I haven't used it in the real world, but
just on the internet.
Just on the internet, yeah. But things like ESP32, obviously, I'm into, and LoRa, and I know enough about it, I guess, to be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I think you were on because this isn't the first time that we've had Meshtastic on. It's actually if you
like
go
the
back
third time
to the Twit days. Yeah, it's like the third time, and
Yep.
I think you were on both of the previous ones, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So you're actually the expert here. I'm the newbie. I'm kind of going to be the one that's learning about all this stuff, and hopefully don't ask the same questions that you already asked in the previous two episodes.
Well, so we've got to assume that not everybody has seen the previous. So even if we recover some of that is fine. And
100%.
So Aaron, when he says that he's the newbie and I'm sort of the expert, he's not joking. And so let's get to that disclaimer. So I am actually part of Meshtastic Solutions, and that is the company that has been formed to try to wrangle some of this, wrangle some vendors and make some higher quality devices. And so I do get paid from Meshtastic Solutions, so I do get paid for some of my Meshtastic work. Same for Garth, and same for Ben. And so we want to make sure and let folks know that that's just kind of an integrity thing that we always want to make that clear when there is, that if we didn't, that would be a potential conflict of interest. But it's out there, so we're good to go. But yeah, let's go ahead and bring the guys on and welcome Ben and Garth back to the show. This was it was the three of us. I don't remember who was the host or co-host. It was probably Doc and I the first time, and then the two of you guys.
I think it was Doc. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So welcome. Glad to have you back.
Good to be back.
Good to be here.
So what's changed? What's new in Meshtastic since we had you on last?
Garth, I'll let you handle that one because you've got a better.
Yeah, Ben was on more recently than me, so a ton of stuff has changed since I was last on. I think the growth has been really exponential since last summer when we had several thousand nodes at DEF CON, and it was a pretty big part of Burning Man a few months later. Mm-hmm. And so we've just been working hard to make some features to make messaging and the overall mesh experience work well on these low bandwidth LoRa devices. So we've had to do some work to do some rate limiting and throttling and kind of keep the mesh working well. So some of those have been kind of new things, lots of new app features. I've been doing a lot of work with a newish Android developer and kind of getting things between the platforms a little more in sync, and then adding a lot of new features to the firmware that all sorts of different clients, both the phone apps and then different ham focused radio administrative apps and the web interface and the Grafana dashboards and all sorts of different things working well. So
goodness.
And I think the public key cryptography also was probably after our last call. So that's a big one. And there's been a lot of features around that. And I would say new sets of problems that we've had to solve with as we've dealt with key exchanges over a low bandwidth mesh and coming up with kind of novel approaches to key sharing. Recently, we added a feature where you could actually do sort of a key exchange via a QR code, like a V card file. One of the many ways that Meshtastic follows in the footsteps of SMS, and there's some interesting stuff coming down the pipe there as well, for some out of band key exchanges that maybe we can talk about a little bit later. But
I want to just follow up on one thing that Garth mentioned. I mean, obviously DEF CON is, having that many nodes is huge, right? But I know that at Burning Man there was also so one of the uses for Meshtastic would be emergency or off-grid tracking, people hiking or whatever, right? So I'm just kind of curious, was this in use at the Burning Man that flooded out? Like that's kind of like would be a really good test case of using this technology for emergencies.
Yeah, so this last year, I think there were probably more event usage and such the year before where there was not a flood. It's also really hard on devices with dust and mud and all those different things. But yeah, it held up and provided communication. A lot of the problem with Burning Man last year was sort of escaping. So people were in cars and already on the way out. So there was I don't think I did not hear a ton of discussion around it being used in that context so much, but it did hold up and work pretty well for people as they were kind of getting ready to leave as the rains just kind of overwhelmed everything, I think.
Right. Extinguished
and
man.
I don't know if this was the case last year, but I know some of the folks that I've talked to have indicated that even some of the Burning Man staff and emergency staff use it as part of their communication plan. Obviously, they're not relying solely on Meshtastic, which is something that we advocate. It's like this is a secondary communication. It's not suitable for emergency communication as a primary source. It's one tool in your toolkit. But one of the things that we've been trying to do with events like Burning Man and DEF CON is to try to coordinate with the stakeholders or community members that are interested in getting ready for these events, like working with them to understand the needs and to try to set them up for success and not just, hey, let's go and just operate on the public defaults and hope for the best. Because that's kind of what happened a year ago about this time at Dayton Hamvention, where a bunch of people just showed up with the defaults. They were connected to the root US topic of our MQTT server and just flooded everybody, and it was a disaster. And we kind of had a post-mortem where we said, let's plan this out better next time. Like you guys are hams, you're good at planning. Let's plan this next one out. And happy to report that this year's Dayton Hamvention was a success because we changed a lot of stuff regarding we actually started producing event-based firmware that did a lot of the throttling and rate limiting that Garth has mentioned, but also put the folks on the higher bandwidth presets because Meshtastic has for the default a preset we call long fast, and it's a very balanced approach, so it gets you a lot of range, but it's not really built for thousands of nodes in a small geographical area. It's just not, because that's not the everyday case for usage in Meshtastic. So one of the things that we try to do with these event firmwares is really ratchet it up that higher bandwidth presets so that we have a smaller audience of nodes within Viewshed, and you let the hops do their job, right? And you have less airtime contention to deal with. So that's been instrumental in, I would say, the success of Meshtastic in large events. And we're continuing to kind of refine that approach.
Can that be auto-negotiated? Or I heard you mention you worked on firmware. So I'm guessing like you had to upload new firmware to the device to handle the shorter distances and stuff. But I mean, could that be auto negotiated to say, hey, look, we've analyzed the mesh, right? And we've adjusted to make it optimal.
We've talked about similar features. We don't have anything in place currently, so right now it's an explicit decision from the user, but you can change it at runtime. So I think I mentioned earlier, by default we put people on kind of the balanced, what we call long fast preset, but a user can go in and say like, hey, I want to switch to short fast or medium fast, and kind of ratchet up to that next step in the preset. But there's nothing currently that sort of does a heuristic on the network and says, hey, you might Microsoft Clippy style. We noticed there's a lot of nodes in your in your node DB. You want to try a higher bandwidth preset?
Yeah.
And also one more follow up, Jonathan. And I swear I'm going to let you talk, but I'm so curious about this. So you also mentioned amateur radio and hams. I'm just kind of curious, what do you guys think the relationship is like, or what do they think about this? Like, because traditionally they would be pulling out, like I just pulled this out just in case I needed it, right? Which if I get it in the picture here, right, it's the Baofeng little handheld ham radio thing, right, that I picked up because I'm curious. So, but what's the relationship like with the ham and amateur radio community?
So they're kind of like our system administrator at some level. So from a hub and spoke perspective, they're super interested in radio, and they're always trying to convince new people to get licenses. And it's kind of a struggle to convince people that they know to go out and get their license. And so one of the things that we found that hams really like about Meshtastic is that their friends and family that are not licensed can also use it and kind of join them in their radio hobby. So I'd say a lot of our advocates and influencers, or however those terms are used, are sort of hams. That we do have a ham mode, but because it's not, it is just for hams. It kind of is a feature that they will use a little bit for testing, or seeing that they can use a little extra power from their license with a couple of devices that have power amps, and kind of let them use those extra features. But for the most part, the hams use the encryption of Meshtastic and kind of participate in the regular mesh. But the radio clubs and a lot of the infrastructure is on ham towers and kind of managed by ham. So we have found that they're super interested as a way to kind of spread their interest in the radio hobby to people that aren't licensed. As I think there's kind of, it's a high barrier to get more people involved to get a license. So it's probably not a huge percentage of the total user base, but it's definitely a big percentage of the infrastructure, sort of permanent nodes that are in place, and the leadership of the local groups and some of that stuff. So it kind of aligns really well with amateur radio clubs, and they bring in, every ham probably brings in 5, 6, 10 new users, maybe more if they run a local group. So, and
hams love buying new devices too. Like, so, they're gear nerds like us, right? One of the things that I always tell people, when they're kind of lamenting, like, oh, there's no nodes in my area, like, go talk to your local ham contacts, because those guys will, like Garth said, they'll get you on infrastructure frequently. If you give them the bug, they will get you on infrastructure. Most of the nodes that are advantageously placed in our area that are set up as routers are guys that set up DMR networks, guys that are really involved in radio sonda and ham related activities locally. Those are the guys that unlock the killer locations, in my experience.
Yeah. I think it might be good to take a step back and address real quick. We did this last time, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page. What exactly is Meshtastic? What devices does it run on? And then what is the difference between that and a client? Ben, take it.
Yeah, so Meshtastic, the elevator pitch, I would say is it's off-grid SMS texting over LoRa, and there's some additional stuff like location sharing and sensor data sharing, but the primary feature is the ability to text message people paired to your cell phone over Bluetooth with a IoT device. So I've got the little seed sense cap indicator right here. Basically, you pair to these devices via Bluetooth. You go into the app, you can send off a message. A lot of people just set up their LoRa region and start texting, and you're on a sort of quasi-public network at that point. And there's also the ability to set up your own private encrypted networks as well if you do want to go off-grid and do a backpacking trip or something like that, and you want to set up a network for your friends. There's also the ability to DM people, and as I mentioned earlier, send locations. That's an increasingly popular story in Meshtastic. But the real underlying tech for the delivery over long distances is LoRa, which previous to Meshtastic and some other sort of Arduino projects was almost reserved entirely to the industrial space. So it's really kind of had a renaissance in the maker space. Mm-hmm. I think primarily I would say by Meshtastic at this point, because we're kind of the big dog.
Yeah. Garth, what are the clients, and how is that different from what runs on these embedded devices?
Yeah, so because it runs mostly on microcontrollers, there is a Linux build as well, so you can run it on some small Linux computers as well. But for the most part, the handheld nodes that people are using are running on an ESP32 or NRF microcontroller, and so those devices will Bluetooth to your phone, and then you can connect or serial or TCP for the web and Android, and you can connect to a little bit richer client environment. So there's an iOS app and an Android app and the web UI and some other client projects that are in process, and then display data differently and configure your device and message. And so the client applications are kind of the primary way that most users interact with Meshtastic. And then we also have a new MUI as well, which allows for standalone device usage on some devices that are either touch screens or kind of look like a BlackBerry. Looks like Ben is reaching for one here to hold up. So some sort of standalone devices, so you don't necessarily need a phone to operate with. So, and that the MUI there on the TDEC that you see uses the same client API that I'm using in the iOS app to communicate with the device, and Meshtastic really creates a lot of activity and data that your client app gets to interact with. So for developers, it's been a lot of fun for me. There's no setting up test data or anything. You just sort of turn on your node and it hits you with a big stream of information from local nodes. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. All right, so I've got to ask, because I know people come into the community and they ask us this from time to time. What's the deal with the Android app and the web app? Why are they so far behind? Why is the iOS app the one that gets all of the shiny features?
So when I first started developing the iOS app, there was just Android. I think one of the big advantages was that I wrote it from scratch in Swift UI. Me and Ben actually found some problems in the firmware with the way that the Bluetooth stack was working, so it actually wasn't compatible with the iPhone when we started working on the project, and we using an open project called Nimble, which is a BLE stack, kind of worked to get it set up to work with the timing on iOS, and then Swift UI just really really the declarative UI framework makes it really easy to iterate, add new features, kind of work through the problems. And Android now has the new Compose declarative UI in place, and we've been seeing a lot of the same sort of speed. So the declarative UI, which does kind of box you in a little bit if you use AppKit or some of the older just Kotlin framework, I think you have a lot more granular control over things, but then you also have to do all of those granular things, whereas these new declarative UI frameworks make it really easy to prototype and design features, use the controls that are built into the framework, and really get out a polished version more quickly. So I think that's been COVID helped too. Had some time with COVID, but
how long have you been doing the iOS app?
What, 2021, Ben? Is that about right?
Yeah. So it's been about 4 or 5 years.
That's a long time.
It was issue number 2 in the issue tracker was we need an iOS app, and I think because there was some Bluetooth issues, it took us a little while to figure those out. And then once we got going there, then I launched in the App Store with Meshtastic 2.0, which is
nice.
November 3 years ago now. I don't know. I've sort of lost track
it's about
a little
3 years
bit.
ago. I think it was 2022.
And then just kind of iterating from there. So there's the iOS and iPad OS and Mac OS versions of the app using the cross-platform tools Apple provides.
Back to your original question about, kind of why is there a difference in the platforms in terms of progress too. One thing that's been interesting to me that I've seen as I've been kind of inside of the project for so long is how in open source projects, like you can have kind of one person doing the Herculean effort of like moving something forward and bug fixes and all this work. And then when that person takes time off or even leaves permanently, you're kind of like, oh crap, like what do we do now? Because it's I mean, a lot of open source projects work like that, where you have kind of an unbalanced contributor base. And it's been really interesting for me to see that take place on like the apps. Like Garth is, if you look at the contributor chart on iOS, it's insane. It's like, Garth's like 95% of the commits, if not more. Whereas, you go to some of these other platforms, like the firmware is actually extremely democratic. And I mean, it's just people are constantly pushing up PRs and creating issues. I think some of that is because it's the core of the project, but a lot of that in my mind is because developers enjoy working on something different in a lot of cases, and the firmware is something different than what a lot of us do in our day jobs with full stack web developer or even like a iOS or Android developer in your day job. It's like, oh, I do that in my day job. I don't want to go home and do that. Even if it's firmly in your wheelhouse, sometimes you want to push into something different. So I think that's been something that's been an interesting learning experience for me to see some of that. And even in my own contributions, because I'm a web developer, but I don't do much on the web client at all. I do a little bit of work on the Meshtastic web flasher because that was kind of a passion project. But outside of that, I haven't really touched the bigger tools in my tool chest.
Yeah, interesting.
Is there an issue with? I mean, you mentioned firmware development. I mean, there's a lot of LoRa boards out there, right? And I'm guessing that's kind of a little bit about the solution website, right? Is like, getting towards standards, I assume. But before we get to that, I'm just kind of curious, how hard is it to account for all these different boards, or is everything with LoRa now standardized enough that it's like, oh, okay, it's ESP32 S3 whatever board, it's got LoRa, we know it's going to be on these GPIO pins, or whatever. Is it standardized enough where you can just say, yep, here's the firmware for it, and it'll cover these 20 boards, or is it really fragmented?
It's pretty fragmented. There's definitely like collections of boards that are fairly similar. And we have we call them variants. So you have we have like a variant header file that you add, and you define some common GPIO mappings, and we really try to wrangle it. But unfortunately, when you get into stuff like power management chips and GPS chips, there's so many differences, and a lot of times we're like the last to find out, which is something that we've tried to work on with forming Meshtastic solutions, like how to get injected into that process sooner instead of like being downstream of all of these hardware vendors that are like, hey, we made a new board, and we're like, these are really great. I wish you'd done this one thing a little bit different. So we have our work cut out for us, I would say, on the firmware side of things, just to wrangle what I think is over 100 different targets now. I know not all of them are actively supported, but there's a lot of stuff in there, and even in the DIY space, and we're friendly to people, coming up with their own DIY boards and create pull requests for those.
Is it a unified code base, or like if I have an NRF device, or say I want to run Meshtastic on Linux, is there a different firmware tree or a different repo that I have to go pull?
It's the same repo. There's some stuff in there that kind of gets swapped out based on your architecture. We have a lot of compile time macros that in some cases do unsavory things. In some cases they do exactly what they're supposed to do. But for better or worse, we have, we can say that we support a pretty good amount of architectures, and the fact that we're on the same code base for a Linux native daemon and an ESP32 real-time operating system is pretty. I think that's a good feather to pin in our caps for the project being very flexible, if nothing else.
I'm sure some would tell us that is not a thing that we should be proud of, but we sort of are.
Put the deal with it glasses on.
Yes, indeed. What technology makes that work? Like, what is the underpinnings that allows one code base to run in so many different places?
Yeah, Arduino really, and there's actually kind of a compatibility shim layer that Kevin, the original developer of Meshtastic, pioneered, called Portduino. He started that, and Jonathan, I know you put a lot of work into polishing that up and making it more full featured. But really, Arduino is what enables all of this stuff to share somewhat of a common API, and it's funny because you get like real embedded developers that come in and they're like, "Why are you using Arduino?" And we're like, "Well, would you prefer that we have like segmented code base with native SDK implementations?" It's sort of pick your poison here.
Yeah.
Arduino is not perfect. There's things that I would love to change. Looking at use string class in Arduino, but for better or worse, it is a common set of APIs that you can utilize across all these IoT platforms, and even now Linux native. So we've come a long way with it.
Yeah. All right. One of the things I hear people complain about is unmessageable. What is this new thing, and why are people ticked about it? Who wants it?
So I don't know that there's a couple of people that were unhappy about it. I think the numbers are pretty low. So I'd say the number one complaint from new users about Meshtastic is I saw all these nodes around me and I tried to message them and nobody replied. So what Ben and I did was add a simple Boolean value to the device that says, hey, this is an unmessageable device. And then we added some functionality to both the Android and the iOS apps that says if you're on an older firmware and you're in one of these infrastructure roles, you are unmessageable. And if you upgrade your firmware to one that supports this setting, then you can granularly turn on that value for some of the infrastructure modes. And so one of the things when this project and all of these details move pretty fast, Meshtastic was kind of a rolling set of 20 to 60,000 users for a couple of years. People would come buy a dev board, flash Meshtastic on it, use it a little bit, go take their ESP32 and do something else with it afterwards if they got bored. And we kind of were a small project that kind of was, often if you went out in a local area and turned on your node, you wouldn't see anybody. A lot of the networks were sort of temporary, where people who were airsofting or hiking or whatever would set up a little bit of a network and then take it back down when they went, when they were done with their activity. And in the last couple of years, we've just really seen an exponential growth almost in both the fixed infrastructure that's in place, and then which then makes the network more robust. And then when you turn it on in a big city, I was down in San Francisco last week and joined the local network down there, and over the course of walking dogs for a couple of days, had hundreds of new nodes that got picked up as I was walking around. So part of this is just to kind of improve the experience for the majority of users. And I guess the thing that has been a little bit unpopular is that for some of the administrators, the advanced administrative users who were using direct messages to do some of their coverage testing, the Android and iOS app don't show the ability to message to a router node anymore that was there previously. So, and they can upgrade their firmware. One of the issues that we had is that as with, it's been basically a year. So last year, Ben described the Hamvention, where there was 300 nodes in a metal building and it kind of crashed the network when they connected it to the internet. We've had to add some traffic management basically to, 300 nodes is kind of about the limit if you just let no traffic management occur. And so we've had to add some traffic management to get to the point where we can have these large networks with a couple thousand nodes, which is what users are interested in, right? Is having a large network and being able to communicate with more people. And so the unmessageable stuff that we added is an effort to make the messaging, which is kind of the core of Meshtastic, a better experience for new users and regular users that are text messaging. And I have plenty of faith that advanced users will find ways to do their testing, like they already have, right? They've figured out they're adding features like the direct messaging functionality was not in the Python CLI application, and some contributors are working to add that so that they can maintain their administrative functionality, and then the vast majority of users have a cleaner experience, a smaller contact list. So, I think realistically, if all of us look in their phone, you might have 200 contacts that you've collected over 25 years or whatever, and then you probably text 50 of those people. And Meshtastic is a lot of the same type of situation. You might have a couple hundred nodes that you've found locally, but you're really only direct messaging with the people that you know. And so that's a much smaller set. So getting the contact list and the messaging experience cleaned up a little bit so that when people do join and they message nodes, they're not messaging a repeater or a router that's sitting at the top of a mountain and never has anybody that will ever respond. So
yeah,
that's kind of a. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say it's just interesting. Like there's definitely some. There's some opposition, I would say, between because Meshtastic is and has been around like dev boards, and you have the Tinker audience. Like there's a lot of vocal people that love their power user features, and unfortunately, as we try to make this more accessible tech, because that's something even they'll complain about. Is like I still can't hand this to grandma and have her text message, and features like this unmessageable were really designed to set people up for success. And so it's interesting, like hearing feedback from technical users that want all the knobs, and then also balancing that with like, oh, we need this to be easy to use first, and it needs to be, we need to have some sensible defaults. Sometimes there's some friction, but I think we're headed in a good direction.
Yeah, that was actually going to be part of my next question, which was, sounds like you're working on the usability features, especially for new users or newer users and things like that. And that kind of led me, and feel free to just, send me to a website to go read more, right? You don't have to answer the whole thing, but like how, if I was to get into this, I mean, how easy would it be for me to find a Meshtastic node, just to know that it's even out there, right? So I get my ESP32 with LoRa, I get my firmware installed, I'm at least able to do that on my own, right? And then what? Like, how do I know if anybody in my neighborhood is using it?
After you have and some of the nodes come pre-flash, so you might not even have to do that. But after you set a LoRa region, it will basically, your node will beacon out its information, and if you get a response, you'll start seeing a flurry of nodes come in to your device, and they'll show up in the app. And if your device has a screen, they'll show up on the screen as well. And a lot of that depends on like where you are. If you're in a more rural area, the chances are, unless you're in a really great line of sight to like a router or something on a mountain, chances are you might not have a huge audience there. But if you're, like Garth said, in San Francisco, you're driving around and you're just picking up nodes. It's kind of a similar thing where I live, which not a big town, but just a huge network. So it really depends. And that's something that's been kind of a struggle to communicate with people that are frustrated first users, because I think the people that kind of put it down immediately are the people that don't have a big public network in their area, and they're like, well, I don't really see the point in this. Like, unless you're picking it up for sort of the original use case of Meshtastic, which was, I'm going to create my own private network, because that was kind of the original story, and I would say still somewhat is for a lot of people. Like, I want to go backpacking and set up this network. Now it's shifted a lot for a lot of people to like, I want to join the public mesh, which is something that just kind of manifested over time. And when you don't have a huge list of nodes in the area, I could see how that's kind of discouraging. And unfortunately, there's really nothing we could do about that other than tell people like, go build the network. You're the first. Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, I mean, I was talking to a buddy of mine a couple weeks ago. His wife's working in San Francisco now, and he lives in the East Bay. And he's like, I'd really like just to be able to get, in case of an earthquake, which will happen, right? Again, eventually. Like, it would be nice just to be able to text and be like, hey, let's meet here, or whatever, the emergency stuff. Yeah. And he wants that to be off grid because, the cell phone network's going to be overwhelmed or down or whatever. So it is reaching, I think, as an alternative technology, especially for emergency stuff, I think it is reaching more of the general population, seems like. Based on my one interaction with my friend.
Yeah, and we've worked really hard since Garth and I got started on the project at making the setup of devices as frictionless as possible. There's still some room, but I do hang my hat on the fact that you can't, if your device already has the firmware on it, you can, and you have the app, all you have to do is pair via Bluetooth and set up your LoRa region, and you can start messaging people right out of the box, which is pretty usable in my experience. I've walked some newbies through it and felt pretty good coming out of it, but there's still some always room for improvement there.
Cool. Well, what I'll do is I'll set up mine, which is sitting in a drawer over here, over here. I'll set up mine and then get my buddy to set up his, right? And we can do some testing.
Yeah. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Very, very interested. What about if you wanted to use Meshtastic without a cell phone? Is there any like standalone sort of devices? Does that exist?
This guy right here, the LilyGo T-Deck that we mentioned earlier, that has the MUI installed on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much the aesthetic of an old BlackBerry phone.
Yeah.
So it's a standalone device. You can start texting kind of out of the box once you set your LoRa region. There's also some map support via the SD card. You can download map tiles. It's a little bit of a fun adventure doing that still, but it does exist. I would say in the story of not necessarily standalone, but without having like a cell phone, there's been some interesting kind of projects around making like sort of a headless, Linux node that talks over the internet via MQTT. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting projects out there around Meshtastic.
Yeah, cool. So do we want to talk about some of the things that are upcoming? You guys want to tease anything that's coming?
One of the big things that's interesting to me that we'll be unveiling soon is a new UI for the default UI. I think one thing that Meshtastic has not had a whole lot of change in is just the standard UI. We've had some new parallel UIs that have been created. One of our community members, Todd Herbert, came up with an e-ink display special UI called Ink HUD, which is really neat. And then Emmanuel Verge, another community member, came up with the MUI for the T-Deck that I showed. And those are really neat, but the standard Meshtastic UI hadn't really changed that much from when I first got involved in the project. It's kind of languished, and so some of the community members have basically taken it on themselves to really storyboard that out and redesign that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at unveiling shortly. It's getting kind of QA'd right now and feature frozen. Awesome. And all those things. But I think it's going to be really positive, really received.
Yeah, you need to do it. Well, maybe you've done it already, but e-ink, obviously, ultra low power. You could do a DEF CON badge or an event badge, and just give everyone gets their badge, and they can start like communicating with people like from their badge.
Yeah.
There you go, Jonathan. There's you an idea for a new frame for the for the display, a badge frame.
Yeah. Wasn't somebody at DEF CON talking about doing a badge?
Yeah, I think there's several badge efforts that are going on right now. I have not kept up to date, and I know there's one of the community members came up with sort of a badge that I think they sell at conferences called the Nibble. That's like a little like cat or something. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of DIY devices out there that I can't keep track of all of them.
Yeah, a badge frame. So like a frame of the UI that just does like some sort of badge function. That's actually a really interesting idea. We may have to touch base on that. All right, so when this episode releases, there's probably going to be a new alpha out from Meshtastic, and it's got something in there about low entropy keys. You want to give folks a quick heads up on what's going on there?
Yeah, so one of the things that we found out recently is that there was some issues with some of the devices that came out had essentially been, from what we could see, cloned from a node that had been running. And so we've had this happen before. Unfortunately, we're no stranger to this problem. So we've had issues in the past where a vendor sent out a bunch of nodes that shared the same like node ID and MAC address and all these features, and we're like, what in the world? Like, why are these all the same? And get these confused reports from users. But unfortunately, the thing that's changed now is when previously when you would spin up a device post our changes back in 2.5, Meshtastic 2.5 firmware, where we introduced the public key cryptography, we would actually generate that public-private key pair on boot. And I think that's one of the things that's unfortunately precipitated this issue where, we had, as I mentioned earlier, where we had people cloning the image for a device. And so you have this sort of, oh no, these are all the same device problem. But that's essentially, I think, happened at some level with the public key issue where those had been essentially cloned. So one of the things that we've tried to do is identify those and alert the user, hey, we've seen this key before. You may want to be aware of this. And one of the other mitigation steps that we had, I think, Jonathan, you said was, this should have been obvious in retrospect.
Yes.
But we have the concept of creating that public-private key pair at the time a user selects their LoRa region. So it would happen later in the process instead of on that initial boot with a new firmware. So that gives us a couple of things. That gives us a little bit of insulation from this happening again, where a vendor inadvertently clones device images, but also adds some additional entropy because the device has been running longer. There's more fuzz factor.
Yeah, I'm gonna take off my host hat for a second and put on my guest hat and talk a little bit more to this. I know I'm cheating so badly. So there is the way it was set up was it's a X25519 key, and it was getting generated again, like we said, on boot. By default on the first boot, and on some of these devices, come to find out, and this is the reason why we use the term low entropy keys, come to find out on some devices, it was not actually using the hardware randomness sources. It was just using like the micros timestamp. And because it is a somewhat repeatable boot process, there was also, and this is why Ben is kind of hedging his bets here, because like there was also the possibility that on some of these devices, because the boot took the same amount of time to happen every time, that you would hit that same micros number, and so you would then have, your random key seed would be the same. And so, this supposedly impossible to crack very large random number would get generated the same. And so that was one of the other problems that was possible there. And so we had a guy make the suggestion, well, just wait until the user hits sets up the LoRa. And it's like, that's brilliant. And then we also went in and added some more sources of randomness to make that work. So yeah, it was a really kind of a booger of a problem. And when I first discovered that there were devices out there with matching keys, I think I told Ben, I'm like, this is a hair on fire kind of problem. We're still trying to figure out like how widespread that is. Are we talking about a couple of hundred of these out in the wild, or is there a bunch more than that? But we want to let folks know about it, and that's why we've got it's added to the firmware now in this release that as we're talking, it's going to get minted hopefully today as an alpha. It'll warn people about it, and then people can get their keys regenerated. It's a lame problem to have, but we're trying to deal with it.
But we've got a big-brained solution for it.
Well, at least you're not just leaving it up to, at least you're going to warn people, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes what happens is something just stops working, or it's not working right or whatever. And then you go to the GitHub issues, and sure enough, somebody's like, oh yeah, we've got this problem. Like, oh, thanks for telling me. I've been struggling uploading different firmwares for this thing for the last month. Like, yeah.
It's been interesting in the project, I would say, as far as the security stuff is concerned, and I'm sure Garth probably shares some thoughts here as well. But like a lot of times, people come in and they'll put out a CV, a security advisory for something, and it'll eventually turn into a CV. And we've had more of that as the project has grown in popularity. And some of them are very academic, tenuous, I would say, like attacks on the protocol or on a device. And then some of them are like, oh, facepalm, this is an if statement was missed here, and we just now noticed it. And it's, I would say that's somewhat of a problem in general with software, where a lot of times it's the little things that get you, and I've certainly seen that to be the case with Meshtastic as it's kind of grown, but we've come a long way.
Yeah. So I don't think we actually said, and I was going to interrupt you and ask, and then forgot to. What is the public-private key actually for? How did that come about? What loophole was that closing?
Yeah, that was the big fly in the ointment, I would say, for Meshtastic's previous security model for DMs. When Meshtastic started, it was entirely public communications, in the broadcast communications, probably be the better term for it. So the idea is you share your pre-shared keys on your channels, and if other devices have those channels, then they can decrypt traffic. And a lot of that communication was and still is just broadcast over a channel. And the direct message feature was kind of an afterthought within that, because the original story was start your backpacking private network and not like start this big public network. And so direct message was a courtesy of privacy, where it would the apps would essentially say this is destined for this node over here, but they were encrypted on the same pre-shared key. So technically, anyone with a node could decrypt that traffic, and the apps wouldn't display it for you. But if you wrote your own app, you could sniff DMs that were decryptable on those pre-shared keys. So the public key cryptography was really to establish more private direct message communications that happened outside of the traditional pre-shared key channel broadcast. So it really closed the loophole on DMs not really being private, but being more of a courtesy communication.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember we got people do all kinds of crazy stuff with Meshtastic and capturing packets and all that. And there was one of the events that somebody showed us a dashboard, and it was like showing live messages go across. It's been several years ago now. It was showing live messages go across, and we looked at it and we're like, oh, those are DMs. People don't realize that those are essentially in the clear, because again, it went from this, you set up your own private network where everyone is trusted, to you have a public network, and people were just sort of assuming that when they were DMing that there was some kind of a additional layer of security, and that early in the project there wasn't, and we saw that, and it's kind of like, oh, this is really bad. We need to fix this.
Yeah, it was an awkward thing to communicate around to say like, hey, just so you're aware, DMs are not private, and it's sort of a little bit of a black eye as a project that bills itself as private. So I was glad we could close that issue. But it has, like I said earlier, it's exposed its own set of problems that we're working through still, but it's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Aaron, you have anything else you want to ask about?
Yes, desperately.
Okay, go for it.
Final question. So which board, instead of trying to find my board that's in those cabinets over there somewhere, or maybe in a closet, or maybe out in the garage, if you were to recommend one for me to get today to get started, do you have one that has cheap but also decent antenna?
The one Garth's holding up right now,
yeah,
I think we maybe lost Garth's audio because he looked like he was trying to talk earlier.
Nope.
But yeah, the Seed Sense Cap T1000E is one that I really like, because it's everything you need in a node that doesn't have a screen, that you just pair to your phone and start communicating. And it's about like $45 price point, I think, right now.
I'm seeing $50 on Amazon.
Yeah. If you order it from Amazon, it's probably there's a little bit of markup there, but that's an excellent one, because I think it's kind of what what Garth and I were looking for originally when we started the project. And thankfully, there's these vendors have really stepped up to make a lot more commodity hardware that is kind of turnkey. This thing comes already flashed with Meshtastic. It's got like a couple days battery life, has GPS, has a buzzer. So it's a really good one for getting started. I think if you do like the standalone device experience, the LEGO T-Deck is a good one to look at. Rack Wireless also has some really nice options. They've been in the community for a while, like the WisMesh Pocket. And the Rack system ecosystem has a lot of, their WisBlock system has a ton of sensors. There's also some new ones on the market that I really like the this Elecro M1 is pretty neat. It's a little e-ink guy. And it's got a little knob. I love things with little knobs on them that controls the backlight.
Yep, for sure. Cool. Those are some of the ones I was looking. There's also, I noticed a LEGO T-Beam.
Mm-hmm. That's the original.
Yeah.
That's the OG device. I don't necessarily recommend that. It's not that it's bad. It's just it's a little bit of an older product. That they do have an updated version of that called the T-Beam Supreme that has some interesting features. But those original T-Beams, I always call the T-Beam like the Bofang UV5R of Meshtastic. It's like everybody's got one. It was kind of the de facto device that you saw like this is a Meshtastic, over the years, but now a lot of people also like the Heltec devices. They're very very reasonable.
Okay, yeah, like $19 you can get. Now, of course, I don't know what the antenna is going to be like with the $19 version, but it does come with a antenna, and it also, the nice thing about it is it gives you access to all the GPIOs. So unlike the Sense Cap, I don't know if you could break that open and do some hacking on it or what, but it sounds like you don't need to. That's supposed to be like an all-in-one kind of device. But the Heltec ones, they've got regular pin headers on them and stuff, it looks like.
Yeah, that's more of a DIY device. So it's going to be more makery focused. You can do things with the GPIO pins. I always recommend when people do buy devices like that they upgrade the antenna, because they're normally they get you started, but they're not. You're not gonna be overwhelmed with the awesome performance of those antennas.
By the way, I just heard from my buddy. He just bought a second T1000 for his wife, and he's got a solar base station set up.
Awesome. Yeah. Even the solar world is getting somewhat a turnkey. Rack Wireless and Seed, I think, both have sort of turnkey solar nodes, and that's one of the things that Garth and I kind of bonded initially over our DIY solar nodes on the original Meshtastic discourse group, which is now gone. Rest in peace.
No more. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we can hear. He's back.
One thing that's really nice about the T1000 is it kind of has a bunch of built-in stuff. So you don't have the GPIO access, but it has a temperature sensor. It has a buzzer. It has a button. So it has a lot of those pieces that you would add to a DIY device within a nice pre-built case. So you can kind of play around with the different telemetry data and see kind of a bunch of the different features working well. And then you can obviously buy more nodes as you go to get access to GPIO and some different things as well. So.
Sure. Nice.
Yeah. One other device, this is not exactly hacker friendly. I mentioned it earlier, but the Seed Weo Tracker L1 Pro, if you want to mess around with the new upcoming kind of basic UI where we've revamped that, this thing is really good with that. It's what I've been testing it with, and I've very much enjoyed it.
And it also has a buzzer, so you can beep and boop. I love the beeps and boops.
We need to put a bug in Seed's ear to add a compass module to this, because then it would be perfect. That would be fun. All right, Aaron. Anything else before it's 12:30 already? It's about time.
No, it's been fun kind of
Yeah.
geeking out over this stuff. So
Oh yeah, we're working on it. We're trying to get Aaron pulled in. Next thing you know, he'll be writing source code and sending us pull requests.
That's how it starts. It always starts with a Floss Weekly, and then
yeah,
it's like our recruitment video.
It started with Floss Weekly.
That's right.
That's great. Okay. So is there anything from you guys that we didn't ask about that we need to? Anything we need to cover?
That covered a lot of stuff. I will say, as kind of a UX focused developer and stuff, it is an area that we don't have a ton of. Open source contributors often tend to be adding little features or a thing that they want or fixing bugs and some of that stuff. But I know there's a lot of designers and people doing UX stuff, and it's also fun to do that stuff in open source. You got to adjust your mindset a little bit because you're working with a worldwide group of opinionated developers and people as well. So you're not going to have like the kind of control over everything that I think sometimes designers and UX people have. But it's been a lot of fun to work on the UX, and we're doing a ton of work on simplifying and converging and usability and that type of stuff. So happy to have designers and UX people as well as all the C++ and firmware developers as well. So.
All right, so I've got to ask you guys each a pair of final questions, and we'll see if your answers have changed from a couple of years ago. What's your favorite text editor and scripting language? This is where you lose all your geek points, right, Ben?
Yeah, I'm still going to say VS Code. VS Code and script, man. I have to say I've warmed up a lot to Python as a scripting language. So a leopard can't change the spots. No, I still do work a lot with PowerShell in my day job. So PowerShell is nothing if nothing powerful, but in terms of cross-platform scripting, Python.
Yep. Garth, same two questions.
Yeah, I think I probably said Visual Studio Code last time as well. Boy, I'm not doing much scripting anymore, to be totally frank about it. But I tend to do a lot of UX and stuff anyway. So at work, I have a fantastic DevOps person that has taken over a lot of those things, and I don't have to do much of it anymore. So I am not scripting a whole bunch right now.
That's fair.
Garth's favorite scripting language is send it to Ben to write it in whatever he's doing.
Yep, sounds like it. All right, it has been fun. Thank you guys both for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right, Aaron, have we talked you into it? Sounds like you're about to order a device.
I'm about to pull the trigger. I need to do a little bit more thinking about how much I want to actually hack around with the device.
You get one of each.
Whether I go with the... Well, that's the thing. Like, it would be really easy and non-committal to start with one of the $19, $20 modules and just play with it. And then if I like it, I can go ahead and get something that's a little bit more rugged, like the Sense Cap or something like that, which is, might have a little better antenna, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I have to think about it, have another cup of coffee, and then I'll be pulling the trigger on one of these devices. Yeah, and it's nice to know that my buddy's already set up. He's like ready to go, so we can. He can help me test things out and work things out. So
that's what got me at the very beginning. It's like, wait a second, I can try this out for $20, and it's an open source project. Sold. I bought that. That is below the threshold for me of kind of an impulse buy. It's like, I can drop $20 on this new toy and play with it. And then I got it in and started working with them and have not turned back yet. I just kind of got hooked.
Right. And like you were saying, I think in the chat is I can buy, once I have the $20 one, and then I get the $50 one, then I can play with them. People in-house as well. Yeah.
People do some real interesting things with these, like particularly the Sense Cap. They're waterproof, and I've seen people like clip them onto dog collars and track things like that, and it's real interesting use cases people come up with for them. So
right.
Anyway, what anything you want to plug while we have you here?
Well, of course, you can go to my YouTube channel or either of my YouTube channels, Retro Hack Shack or Retro Hack Shack After Hours, and check out my explorations into repairing and talking about vintage computers. Currently got a couple series going on. One is I got a big pile of IBM PCs, the old ones, right? The original ones, 5150, 5160, 5170. They were dropped off at e-waste.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of going through and fixing those. And then I started a new series on the second channel where I'm basically doing the same thing. It's like, what's the difference between the channels? I don't know anymore. But I'm doing the same thing with a Apple II that I found where this was like some guy's, favorite PC or something, because he had all the boards inside. It was an Apple II Plus, and but like 3 or 4 different mods were done to it. And so we're doing a little bit of archaeology there, taking my time and showing, how to repair certain things and get it up and working, and hopefully bring it back to its glory, and making whoever had this Apple II originally, very happy with those efforts. And then, Oh yeah, and then also for anyone that's bought a RGB to HDMI device for me for getting HDMI video out of some of those older computers, I just released on the main channel audio board. So you can add this audio board to your RGB to HDMI, and then that will combine the audio from your system into the HDMI output so that you don't have to hook up separate speakers. That's been the most requested feature. And Ian, the maintainer of the project, came up with this board, and I'm selling it on my website, retrohackcheck.com. And it's been selling like hotcakes because people have been dying to kind of get an all-in-one device and not have to order another combiner, HDMI combiner, or use separate speakers. This does it all for you. It's really simple to hook up, and I showed that off on the main channel a week ago or so.
Yeah.
So yeah, check that out. Sorry, a lot of plugs there.
But... Oh no, that's fine. Those converter boards, are those just for legacy computers, or can we use it for like old game systems too?
So they top out kind of at color composite. They won't do color composite. Okay. So they will do digital color signals. So like, for example, if you have an old IBM PC that's using EGA, CGA, MDA, or if you have a Commodore 64, there are solutions from that. You kind of need some additional boards to make that work. If you have an Amiga, you can make that work. There are probably about 50 or 60 different old computers from back in the glory days, as I know them, from the late 70s up through the late 80s, that used either digital TTL for color, that won't do VGA, for example, right? So if you're looking to do composite video, then, there's other projects for that, like RetroTink. If you're looking to do VGA to HDMI, there are other projects that do that, like the open source scan converter, OSSC. But if you're looking to convert, I've got a TRS-80 Model 3, right? That was probably released in, 1980 or something. And it's got monochrome output, and I just want to get that in pixel perfect HDMI quality that I can upscale to go on a big modern 4K monitor. Yeah. You can do that very cheaply with this device, and it uses a Raspberry Pi Zero, or you can use other Raspberry Pis, but its form factor is designed to fit right on top of a Raspberry Pi Zero. And I wish I had one sitting here. They're all out someplace else, but yeah, it's just a little device. And the thing I love about it is it's modular. So you get your Raspberry Pi Zero, you get the main board, and then you can add an analog board or a digital board or this audio board and kind of customize it for what you have in your collection and swap things out. And you say, okay, now I want to take it and run a different board with it and get HDMI out of that. And that's how I test most of the systems I work on, is by using one of these devices and just swapping out little components here and there. And it's like, okay, let's see if it works.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate you being here, man.
You bet. Anytime. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been. Okay, if you want to find more of me, there's, of course, Hack-A-Day. We've got the security column, goes live Friday mornings. And then the Untitled Linux Show is my Linux show over at twit.tv/ULS. And we have a lot of fun there covering what's new in hardware and software, and these days, lots of drama around open source. I don't enjoy covering that, but we do. We talk about it. There's plenty of it these days. Goodness. But we have fun. You can go check that out. We appreciate everybody that's here, both that get us live and on the download. And we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.